بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، صلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أما بعد، فحياكم الله جميعا معاشر الإخوة والأخوات، ونسأل الله جل وعلا أن يرزقنا وإياكم القبول، وأن يوفقنا وإياكم للصبر، ولا سيما في مثل هذه المجالس التي ربما يحصل انقطاع في المعلومة بسبب اللغة. فمرة أصحاب اللغة العربية يكونون على انتباه ويقظة، ثم يحصل الانقطاع. هذا يحتاج إلى صبر ومجاهدة. فما أجمل هذه المجالس التي يقف فيها الإنسان في هذه الرياض التي قال عنها النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: إذا مررتم برياض الجنة فارتعوا. قالوا: وما رياض الجنة؟ قال: حلق الذكر. ولا شك أن من أعظم حلق الذكر مجالس العلم. نكمل إن شاء الله بعد ترجمة المقدمة. تفضل.
Now, so the Sheikh, Allah, he began praising Allah Azza wa Jal and asking Allah Ta'ala to send salat and salam upon the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, his family and his companions altogether. The Sheikh Allah Ta'ala, he mentions, may Allah Ta'ala give you life, O assembly of brothers and sisters. We ask Allah Ta'ala to give us and provide us with acceptance, and likewise to give us patience, especially in the likes of these gatherings in which there is a break, and there is a break in the continuity due to there being a need for translation. And so those who may speak the Arabic language but not the English language, they are in need of being patient during those breaks in the translation, or for the sake of the translation. And likewise for those who speak English but not Arabic, they have to be patient with the Arabic in order that they can wait for the translation. And so the likes of these gatherings, they require some patience from the one who is seeking this goodness. He says, and this is while we are within some of the gardens of paradise. That the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, come to the gatherings, or come to the gardens of paradise. And the companions asked him, what are the gardens of paradise? He said, the majalis of dhikr, the gatherings of dhikr, the gatherings of the remembrance of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. And so, and from amongst the best forms of dhikr, the best form of the remembrance of Allah ta'ala is that which is connected to beneficial knowledge. So we're going to complete, inshallah ta'ala, that which we began from the book of manners, from this book.
طيب، وقفنا على الحديث الرابع، وهو حديث ابن مسعود رضي الله عنه وأرضاه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: إذا كنتم ثلاثة فلا يتناجى اثنان دون الآخر حتى تختلطوا بالناس من أجل أن ذلك يحزنه. هذا الحديث فيه أدب عظيم من أدب المجالس، وهو عدم التناجي والانفراد عن واحد في المجلس، سواء كان التناجي بين اثنين أو ثلاثة أو أربعة أو أكثر، ويبقى واحد لوحده، فإن هذا منهي عنه. والله جل وعلا يقول: إنما النجوى من الشيطان. ففي الحديث مراعاة القلوب، وإذهاب ما يكون سببا لسوء الظن أو سببا للحزن. والنهي كما قال أهل العلم هو للتحريم. والمقصود بالتناجي أي أن يتحدث من في المجلس بانفراد عن واحد. فإذا كان من في المجلس عددهم ثلاثة فلا يتناجى اثنان دون الثالث، وإذا كان عددهم أربعة فلا يتناجى ثلاثة دون الرابع. لكن إذا تناجى اثنان دون اثنين فلا حرج في ذلك. هذا في موضوع التناجي إذا كانوا على لغة واحدة. كذلك يدخل في هذا الباب أن يتحدث اثنان بلغتهم ولو معلنا بما لا يفهمه الثالث، فإن أهل العلم أعدوا ذلك من التناجي المحذر منه والمنهي عنه. وعلى هذا فيجوز في بعض الحالات بما يكون الراجح فيه عدم حصول هذه المفاسد، مثل مثلا أن الأب يتحدث مع ولده في إكرام ضيف مثلا أو نحو ذلك، بما يغلب على الظن أن هذا الأمر لا يحزن الضيف، والضيف يعرف أن هذا فيه ما يتعلق بخدمته أو ما يتعلق بالطعام ونحو ذلك من هذه الأحوال التي يغلب على الظن عدم حصول ما يحزن الإنسان أو ما يكدر خاطره في ذلك. نعم.
So we left off at this narration, and this is the fourth narration that we're going to mention in the sitting, and it is the narration that comes on the authority of Ibn Mas'ud, may Allah be pleased with him, that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, when three of you are together, two must not talk privately, ignoring the other, until you mix with other people, since this will cause him sadness. Hadith is agreed upon by Bukhari and Muslim. The Sheikh Allah mentions that, and so this narration, and it shows us the impermissibility, it contains a great adab from the adab of the gathering, and it is that it is not permissible for a person or for a group of three, for two of them within that group to talk privately and thus isolate the third person within that group. It is the same whether there's a group of three, a group of four, or a group of more. He says, and this is based upon the statement of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, that an-najwa, these private secret consultations or secret conversations, are from shaitan. He said this is because it will bring about a bad thought, a person having a bad thought about his brothers, and likewise it will bring about sadness upon that one who has been isolated. The scholars have stated that the nahi, or the prohibition here, is to indicate tahrim, that it is outright haram to do so. He says, and so it is the same whether you have two people, you have a group of three and two people in their group, they're speaking privately, leaving one by himself and not speaking to him. Or you may have a group of four people and three of them are speaking privately and they are isolating the fourth person. He says, unless you have a group of four, for example, and there are two people who are talking in a private conversation, and the other two, they can speak to one another. He says, and likewise, what enters into the same ruling is that if you have a group of three and two people are speaking in one language, and the third person does not understand their language, and so they speak in their language which the two of them understand, isolating the third person, this enters into the same ruling. So they should speak, and he said, the Sheikh said, even if it's done audibly where he can hear it, but he doesn't understand their language, then this enters into the same ruling. He says, so they are to speak in a language that this person understands. He says, unless it be in a case wherein it will, based upon the preponderant thought, it would not lead to that particular type of sadness or that isolated feeling for that other person. By way of example, the Sheikh mentions you may have a father who speaks to his son in relation to the guests which they are entertaining. And so he tells his son in a language which perhaps the son understands and the guest doesn't, or he says to the son privately some words in connection to the hosting of this person who they're hosting. And so in connection to service of him or gathering his food and things like that, he gives him some commands so that the guest doesn't necessarily know that he's commanding him in order to serve him. And so in a case like this, the preponderant thought is that it will not lead to some sadness or isolated feeling on the part of that other person that has been left off from the conversation.
الحديث الذي يليه حديث ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه قال: لا يقيم الرجل من مجلسه ثم يجلس فيه، ولكن تفسحوا وتوسعوا. هذا الحديث يتعلق بأدب شرعي عظيم كذلك من آداب الجلوس، وهو أنه جاء النهي أن يقوم الرجل بإقامة الرجل من مجلسه ثم هو يجلس فيه، فإن المجلس أحق لمن سبق إليه، المجلس أحق لمن سبق إليه، إلا أن يكون هذا المجلس مخصص، كالمجلس المخصص لولي الأمر، أو المجلس المخصص للأب الذي يكون في صدر المجلس، أو نحو ذلك، أو مجلس الرجل في بيته، كأن تكون ضيفا فتدخل على مضيفك فهو الذي يشير إليك في مكان الجلوس، وهذا من الأدب. ثم الله جل وعلا يقول مؤدبا لنا: يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا قيل لكم تفسحوا في المجالس فافسحوا يفسح الله لكم. والمسلم من طبيعته أنه يكرم أخاه بالتوسعة عليه، يكرم أخاه بالتوسعة عليه، لا يضيق عليه. إذا جاء يريد أن يجلس فيقول له لا يوجد مكان، فإن هذا مما يوغر في الصدور، بل ينبغي أن يفسح له في مجلسه. ولذلك جاء عن بعض السلف أنه قال: 3 لا أستطيع على مكافأتهم، وذكر منهم: ورجل دخلت مجلسا فأفسح لي، يعني وضع لي مكانا أجلس فيه. وهذا الأدب في قوله صلى الله عليه وسلم: لا يقيم الرجل، أيضا نفس الشيء بالنسبة للنساء، فكذلك المرأة لا تقيم المرأة. قال أهل العلم في الحكمة من النهي، قالوا الحكمة في هذا النهي من استنقاص حق المسلم المقتضي للضغائن، يعني سيسبب ضغينة. قالوا والحث على التواضع المقتضي للمواددة. معنى ذلك أنك إذا نفرت أخاك من أن يجلس بجانبك كان هذا سببا للعداوة، وإن قمت بإفساح المجال له للجلوس بجانبك كان هذا سبيلا للمودة والمحبة. ثم قال أهل العلم في شرح هذا الحديث، قالوا: فالناس في المباح كلهم سواء، فمن سبق إلى شيء استحقه. يعني إذا جئت إلى مجلس ولم يسبقك إليه أحد فأنت تستحق الجلوس، لكن أن تقيم إنسان من مجلسه أو أن تجلس بين 2 يتحدثان هكذا رغما عنهما فليس هذا من الأدب. بل جاء يا إخوة في السنة حديث عجيب، وهو النهي عن أن يجلس الرجل بين الابن وأبيه، النهي عن أن يجلس الرجل بين الابن وأبيه، وكأن صلة الأب والابن من قوتها لا ينبغي أن يأتي شخص ويقطع هذه الصلة، ولو كانت هذه الصلة حسية وهي موضوع المجلس. فإذن لا ينبغي للإنسان أن يفرض نفسه على مجلس ليس له فيه سعة، يعني أن يجبر الناس على أن يوسعوا له، ليس له ذلك. والأصل أن الإنسان إذا دخل إلى مجلس فليجلس في أقرب مكان يجد فيه فسحة، ولا يحرص على أن يجلس في صدر المجلس أو في مكان غيره. ثم إذا قام رجل من المجلس ليأخذ حاجة فهو أحق بمكانه إذا رجع. ومعنى ذلك إذا تعرف أن فلان قام من المجلس فلا يجوز لك أن تذهب وتجلس مكانه بحكم أنه قد قام. ولذلك قال العلماء النهي في هذا الحديث للتحريم وليس للكراهة، نعم. أعتذر عن الإطالة طبعا. لا بس. جزاك الله خيرا.
Now, so the Sheikh Hafidhahullah, he says that the next narration that comes, it is reported on the authority of Ibn Umar, may Allah be pleased with him and his father, who said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, a man must not make another man get up from his place and then occupy that seat or that place himself, but you should spread out and make room. The Shaykh Hafidhahullah, he says that this hadith also contains a great mannerism of the gathering, and it is that it is prohibited to come to a gathering, make someone stand up in the gathering so that you can sit in that person's place. He says, but rather whoever is the first one to sit in that seat, then they have the most right to it, unless it is an assigned seat. For an example, you may have in a particular gathering an assigned seat for the ruler, or an assigned seat for an elder, or what have you. That's that person's assigned seat. So in this case, there's no harm in that particular person coming and taking his assigned seat, because that seat belongs to him. Similarly, you may have the man of the house. This is his seat, his particular seat in that home, in his home. This is where he sits. And so if he comes and he finds someone in his place, then he can ask for his place back. Now, he says that, and this is because Allah Ta'ala, he has mentioned, and he has told us the tremendous adab inside of his book, when he says that when it is said to you, make room, meaning inside of a gathering, then do so, then make room inside of that gathering. He says, and because the nature of a Muslim is that he honors his Muslim brother by way of making space for him inside of his gathering. And this is, in order that, as long as there is space for him inside of the gathering, then he makes space for him. Due to this, you find that some of the Salaf, they said, there are three who I'm not able to compensate. There are three categories of people who I can't pay back a good that they've done to me. And they mention amongst those three, the one who makes space for me inside of his gathering. He says that, and so the Sheikh, he says that, and so this is because, and so the scholars have mentioned that the wisdom behind this prohibition is that it may, if a person does not make space in the gathering, then this is something that can possibly bring about ill feelings and hard feelings and grudges and the likes of that. Whereas if a person does make space in his gathering for someone who comes to that gathering, then it brings about love and affection and closeness. He said, just imagine if you come to a gathering and you want to sit next to a person and he doesn't make room for you to sit next to him. He doesn't want you to sit next to him. Versus if a person, you come to the gathering and a person, he makes room for you to sit directly next to him. It brings about a feeling of love and closeness and affinity for that person. He says that, and so, and the Sheikh, he mentions that the scholars have stated that the people are all the same as it relates to this issue. All of them occupy the same status as it relates to the issue, meaning whoever is the first one to a particular place, then that person has the most right to that place. And no one should come and make that person stand up so that they can occupy his particular place in that gathering. He says, and amongst that which has been prohibited greatly in this regard, and this is something which has come in the Sunnah, is it is likewise prohibited to separate two people that are sitting next to each other. Two people that are sitting next to each other, then we should not separate them. And that which enters into this on a higher level is to separate between a son and his father that are sitting next to each other. He says, and this is because to break that sila, to break that connection, it is something which is prohibited, even though it's something like this. Even in something like this, whereas though you come and you sit between the father and the son, you're breaking that connection between the father and the son, and this is something which is prohibited. Sheikh, he says that, but rather what is incumbent upon us in our gatherings is to make room as long as there is room to be made. As long as there's room to be made. He says, and so it is likewise prohibited to force the people when you come into a place and there's absolutely no room. There's absolutely no room in that particular gathering, but you force them to make room for you. You force and you squeeze your way into that gathering. This also is something which it's not proper, it's not befitting. Now, he says, and so for this reason, Now, the Sheikh, he mentioned as well that if a person who is in a particular gathering, and he may leave that gathering to take care of some need of his, he leaves the gathering to take care of some need that he has, then when he comes back to that gathering, then he has the most right to his place that he was originally sitting in. So a person can't see that the person may have gotten up from his space and said, okay, I'm going to take his place, and that's it, and he doesn't want to give the place back. But rather, that was his place, and he only left to take care of some need of his. He comes back to it, then that person has the most right to that place where he was sitting. So the scholars have stated that the nahi here, the prohibition that comes here, is to denote tahrim, that it is haram, yani for a person to make someone get up from the place that is rightfully theirs in order that they may occupy their seat.
الحديث السادس هو حديث ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه قال: إذا أكل أحدكم طعاما فلا يمسح يده حتى يلعقها أو يلعقها. هذا الحديث يتعلق بأدب من آداب الطعام، وهو أن الإنسان إذا أكل طعاما مما يبقى على أصابعه منه شيء، وأما الطعام الجاف الذي لا يبقى فيه أثر، فقال أهل العلم لا يلزم منه ما جاء في هذا الحديث، وهو أن يلعق ما تبقى منه، لأنه لا بقية فيه أو لا أثر فيه. فقوله عليه الصلاة والسلام: إذا أكل أحدكم طعاما فلا يمسح يده حتى يلعقها أو يلعقها، هذا فيه العناية بالطعام، وهذا فيه من الدلائل على شكر الله جل وعلا على هذه النعمة، وهو تنبيه للمسلم على امتنان الله تبارك وتعالى عليه بما يسر له من توفر هذا الطعام. ثم لا تعلق لهذا الحديث إن كان الطعام كثيرا أو قليلا، معنى ذلك ليس المقصود من الحديث أنه لقلة الطعام فينبغي للإنسان أن يلعق أصابعه، بل الحديث عام سواء كان الطعام كثيرا أو قليلا، لأن بعض الناس ربما لو رأى إنسانا يفعل هذه السنة قال له: يا أخي الأكل كثير، لماذا تفعل هذا؟ وهذا لا تعلق له لا بكثرة الأكل ولا بقلته. ولذلك جاء ما يدل على الحكمة من ذلك في اللفظ الآخر في قوله صلى الله عليه وسلم: فإن أحدكم لا يدري في أي طعامه البركة. فإن أحدكم لا يدري في أي طعامه البركة. إذن من الأدب الشرعي في أكل الطعام إذا بقي فيه أثر على الأصابع أن يلعق هذه الأصابع، وهذا تطبيق لسنة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أولاً. وثانياً، لا ينبغي أن يقال إن هذا مظهر لا يليق أو شكل مقزز لا ينبغي للمسلم أن يفعله، فليس في سنة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ما يستقذر، بل سنة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كلها خير وكلها نفع وكلها بركة. الأمر الثالث، لا ينبغي يا إخوة في العمل بالسنة النبوية أن ننتظر ما يدل على نفعها من قبل النظريات الطبية أو غيرها. ومعنى ذلك أن يقول قائل: لقد ثبت طبياً أن لعق الأصابع فيه إفراز لبعض المواد التي تساعد على الهضم أو تسهل الهضم أو غير ذلك من الحكم الطبية، بل يقال إن الحكمة الأعظم والأجل والأهم هي متابعة هدي النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. علمنا العلة في ذلك أم لم نعلم؟ ثم الأمر الرابع في قوله صلى الله عليه وسلم: أو يلعقها، معنى ذلك يلعقها هو بنفسه أو يلعقها غيره، والمقصود بغيره ممن لا يأنف عن أن يلعق الأصبع منك كزوجك أو كولدك، لأن الأصل في المسلم أنه إذا بدأ في طعامه أن يكون على نظافة. والبعض ربما يقول أنا آكل بالشوكة أو السكين أو الملعقة التي ربما أكل قبلك فيها 1000 شخص، ويعني معتمدا أنت على أنها غسلت، ويدك هذه أنت تغسلها في اليوم عدة مرات، وإن كان فيها شيء من الوسخ فيحق أيضا لك أن تغسلها قبل الطعام، وهذا في الحقيقة أدق نظافة وأقرب هديا إلى سنة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. لكن السؤال: هل يلعق الإنسان هذه الأدوات مثل الملعقة أو الشوكة إن أكل بها؟ لا، لأن الحديث في ظاهره متعلق باليدين أو باليد اليمنى، لأن اليد اليسرى لا يأكل بها. إذن يلعق إما ابنه أو زوجه أو أخاه إذا كان يقبل ذلك، ويكون بذلك مطبقا لسنة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في هذا الأدب. نعم.
So this next narration is the hadith of Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, who said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, when one of you eats, he must not wipe his hand until he licks it or gives it to someone else to lick. The Sheikh, he mentioned that this hadith, it is a hadith connected to the adab and the mannerisms of eating food, so that when one eats a food, or one eats a particular food, then he finds that there's going to remain something from that food upon his hands or upon his fingers. And so therefore, if there does not remain, if one eats something and there does not remain anything upon his hands or upon his fingers from the effects of that food, then it is not binding upon him to lick his fingers if there's nothing there. The Sheikh, he says that, and so what this narration shows us is the consideration that Islam pays to the affair of food, and likewise it draws our attention to showing gratitude to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala for this ni'mah, for this blessing of food, and being grateful for the favors of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. He says, and it is not a concern to us whether the food is abundant or it is only a small amount of food, because the hadith, it doesn't specify if the food is abundant or if there's only a small amount. So one should not say, when he sees someone else licking their fingers after eating their food, or while you're doing this, there's a lot of food left, you don't have to do that. He says, but rather, he's following the sunnah. He's following the sunnah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He says that, and so, and what shows the benefit of doing this is what has come in another narration of the hadith, wherein the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, for indeed one of you does not know what portion of the food has the blessings within it. The Sheikh, he says that, and from the greatest blessings that lie within the food is the implementation of the sunnah. One is implementing the sunnah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So one should not say, this is something which is unbefitting, it is uncivilized, rather one should not do anything like this. La. He said there's nothing within the sunnah that is uncivilized or uncivil. Rather, all of the sunnah is good, all of it is beneficial, all of it is blessing. Likewise, the Shaykh, he mentions that it is one does so out of his desire to follow the sunnah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and this is the benefit that lies within it. So one should not concern themselves with what doctors say, and if they finally find some medical benefits in these aspects of the sunnah, then at that point, then we deem it to be good. Rather, it was good before that. It was good lie in it before the people found out the medical benefits in licking the fingers, for example, after one eats, or other than it from the sunnah of the Messenger of Allah alayhi as-salatu wasalam. He says that and the best thing that lies in all of this is that we follow the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whether we know the wisdom behind it or not, whether we know the wisdom behind it or the medical benefits that are inside of it or not. We are following the sunnah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. The fourth affair that is mentioned within the narration is connected to his statement alayhi salatu wasalam, or he gives it to someone else to lick, or he gives his fingers or his hand to someone else to lick, meaning that one, he gives his hand to someone else who would not be put off by way of licking his hand or licking his fingers, such as his wife, for example, or his child, and the likes of this. He says, and this is because the asl of the Muslim is clean. The Muslim is someone who's clean, and you expect a cleanliness from him. And so, as it relates to the Sheikh, it is not the case that the Muslim, he's going to take a dish that 1,000 people, or a spoon or a fork that 1,000 people have licked on and eaten off of, and put it right into his mouth or anything like that. The Muslim, rather, he is someone who's clean, and he observes cleanliness to the absolute best of his ability. He says, and if someone else did eat off of his spoon or his fork or whatever, he washes it. Even if he has to wash it multiple times a day, he's going to make sure that it's clean. He says, here we're going to present a question. And the question is, as it relates to the likes of these tools that we use, spoons and forks and the likes of this, from the hadith, do we extract the ruling that we are able to lick, that we should lick our spoon after we finish, or lick the fork after we finish, and the likes of that? The Sheikh says no, because what is apparent from the hadith is that it is connected to the hand. It is connected to the hand. And so therefore, one licks his fingers, and more specifically the right hand. He says, so therefore, one licks his fingers or licks his hand, and then, or he can give his hand to someone who will not be put off by way of that, such as his wife or his child or his brother, if his brother is not one who would be put off by way of that.
الحديث السابع بارك الله فيكم، قوله صلى الله عليه وسلم: ليسلم الصغير على الكبير، والمار على القاعد، والقليل على الكثير، والراكب على الماشي. هذا الحديث من أحاديث أدب السلام، وقد تقدم معنا الكلام بشيء يسير عن فضل السلام، وإنما الكلام هنا عن بدء السلام، أي ممن يكون ذلك. فقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم: ليسلم الصغير على الكبير، والمار على القاعد، والقليل على الكثير، والراكب على الماشي، هي وصايا في من الذي يبدأ السلام. فيبدأ السلام الصغير على الكبير، لأن من حق الكبير أن يقدر من قبل الصغير، كما أن الصغير يترفق به من قبل الكبير، لكن ينبغي على الصغير أن يتهيب في أمر الكبير وأن يعطيه من قدره، ثم يزداد هذا الأمر عناية كلما كان فارق السن أكبر. فالشاب اليافع واجبه مع كبير السن أعظم من واجبه ممن يكبره بسنة أو سنتين. إذن الذي يبدأ السلام إذا تلاقى الصغير مع الكبير الصغير. لكن هل يجوز للكبير أن يبدأ بالسلام؟ نعم، يجوز للكبير أن يبدأ بالسلام، وهذا يدل على تواضعه، وأيضا يدل على اكتسابه للفضل، فهو استحق الفضيلة. وعلى هذا فلا ينبغي أن تفقد هذا الأدب، وهو موضوع السلام، إذا لم يقم به الصغير. فإذا كان الصغير لا يقوم بأمر السلام فيسلم الكبير ويعلمه أن الصغير في الأصل هو الذي يبدأ الكبير، ولا حرج في ذلك. لكن يا إخوة، لا يعلم الصغير أن يبدأ بالسلام على سبيل الزجر والتنفير، فإن المصلحة لا تتحقق هنا، بل الذي تتحقق هي مفسدة، وهي أن الصغير ينفر، وإنما الرفق في تعليم الصغير. ثم قال صلى الله عليه وسلم: والمار على القاعد. المار القاعد له حق هنا مقدم على المار، فالمار هو الذي يسلم على القاعد لأنه أتى عليه، هو الذي جاء عليه، ليس القاعد الذي جاء على المار. طيب، والقليل على الكثير، لأن الكثير في العدد لهم حق على من هم أقل منهم. الكثير في العدد لهم حق على من هم أقل منهم. الراكب على الماشي. طيب، لماذا الراكب على الماشي؟ قالوا الراكب عنده نوع من السلطة لكونه راكب فيسلم هو على الماشي. طيب، من يسلم، الراكب على القاعد أم القاعد على الراكب؟ الراكب على القاعد لأنه يمشي، فهو في حكم المار. الحاصل من هذا كله معاشر الأحبة أن هذه سنة نبوية مهمة جدا، وهي مما تكون سببا في تآلف القلوب وفي التوادد وفي المحبة، لأن السلام كما سبق معكم هو الدعاء بالسلامة، فإذا رأى الكبير الصغير يبدأ بالسلام زادت بينه وبينه المودة والمحبة، وهكذا إذا جاء القليل فاحترموا الكثير، أو إذا جاء المار فاحترم القاعد، لا شك أنه يجد في نفسه من المحبة لحرص الآخر على بدء السلام عليه. نعم.
Then the Sheikh Ta'ala, he mentions the narration that comes on the authority of Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that he mentions that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, the young should greet with salams the old. The one who was passing by should greet the one who was sitting. The smaller group in number should greet the larger group. And the one who is riding should greet the one who is walking. So this narration, it is connected to the etiquette of the salam. And we spoke earlier in the previous sitting regarding some of these etiquettes. However, this narration, it speaks specifically about the one who is to initiate the salam to someone else. He says, and so the narration, it mentions the sequence of this order. And this is an advice from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as it relates to who should initiate the salam. And so he mentions firstly that the child should greet, or the young should greet the elder. And this is because the kabir, the elder, has a right over the one who is younger than them, that they should be respected, just as the young has a right upon the elder that the elder should be kind and merciful to them. He says, and so as it relates to this right, that one or the younger, the youth should greet with salams first the one who was elder than them. He says, and the one, and it goes in stages as well. So you'll find that someone may be a young person, and one who was kabir fi sin, he was an elder, that person has more right than someone who was merely 1 or 2 years older than them. The one who was far older has a greater right. Now, so the Sheikh, he mentions that. However, as it relates to the elder, is it permissible for the elder to initiate the salam to someone who's younger than them? The Sheikh, he says, yes, it is permissible for the elder to initiate the salam to someone who's younger. And it shows humility on the part of that elder. And it shows that he is the possessor of that fadl. He is the possessor of that virtue, and he can deal with that virtue how he pleases. He can choose to greet the salams, greet with salams the one who was younger than them first. He says, nah, but it is not proper and befitting for the elder to just to not greet the young person outright, as a means of zajr, and trying to repudiate him and rebuke him for not giving him the salams first, but rather it may be a teachable moment. It may be a time for him to educate this young person and to teach the young person, because perhaps he doesn't know the etiquette of the salams. And so this is a time for education and cultivation, that he teaches this young person the etiquettes and mannerisms of giving the salams. The Sheikh, he says, and then thereafter he mentions, and the one who is passing should greet the one who is sitting. The one who is passing, who passing by, then he is to greet the one who is sitting. As the passerby, he has this right over the one who is sitting in this instance. Then he mentions the larger group or the smaller group, meaning a number, should greet the larger group, because the larger group, they have a position over those who are less than them in number. Then he mentioned thereafter, and the rider should greet the one who was walking. The rider should greet the one who was walking. He says, and why is it that the rider should greet the one who was walking first? Because the rider has a position of authority over the one who is walking. He says, but as it relates to the rider and the one who is sitting, in this case, who is to greet who first? The Sheikh mentioned the rider is to greet the sitter first. He says that, and all of this is from the sunnah of our beloved Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and it is something that brings about affinity, it brings about love, it brings about camaraderie. And as we mentioned earlier in the previous thing, the salam is a dua that one makes for his Muslim brother, that he has salama. So when you find that a younger person, he greets the elder first, this brings about love between them. You find that the smaller group, they greet the larger group, or the rider greets the walker, and like this, then you find all of these things serve to bring about love and affection one for another amongst the Muslims.
الحديث الثامن حديث علي رضي الله عنه وأرضاه أنه قال: يجزئ عن الجماعة إذا مروا أن يسلم أحدهم، ويجزئ عن الجماعة أن يرد أحدهم. رواه أحمد والبيهقي. هذا الحديث فيه مقال من حيث إسناده، وأما دلالة ما دل عليه في متنه فإنه يفهم منه أن الجماعة إذا مروا على جماعة فيسلم واحد من هؤلاء يكفي عن القادمين، ويرد السلام واحد ممن هم جالسون، فيسقط بذلك أيضا الفرض عن البقية. ولذلك يقول ابن القيم رحمه الله، يقول: ذهب إلى هذا الحديث من قال إن الرد فرض كفاية يقوم فيه الواحد مقام الجميع، ثم قال: لكن ما أحسنه لو كان ثابتا، أي ما أحسن هذا لو كان ثابتا، فهو يضعفه، وفي جملة من أهل العلم على تضعيفه. فالراجح في ذلك أن ابتداء السلام كما سبق معنا أنه سنة مؤكدة، على خلاف بين أهل العلم، في من قال إنه واجب وفي من قال إنه مستحب. فالصواب في ذلك أنه مستحب وهو سنة مؤكدة. أما الرد فهو واجب، وإذا رد البعض سقط عن الباقين في أمر الرد. لكن هنا مسألة يا إخوة: لو أن الإنسان جاء إلى مجلس فغلب على ظنه أنه إن سلم لن يرد عليه أحد، غلب على ظنه ذلك، ورد السلام إيش؟ واجب. فغلب على ظنه أنه لن يرد عليه، فلا يريد أن يقع إخوانه في أمر الإثم لتركهم هذا الواجب. لكن ما سبب هذا الأمر؟ أي ما سبب عدم ردهم؟ ما سبب عدم الرد عليه؟ إن كان عنده مخالفة فليبادر إلى إصلاح نفسه. وأما إن غلب على ظنه عدم ردهم لغفلتهم أو لانشغالهم فليس هذا بعذر أبدا، بل يسلم. وإن لم يردوا عليه نبههم على أنه سلم عليهم حتى يحصل منهم الرد. فإن كان الجالس واحدا كان الرد عليه واجبا، وإن كانوا جماعة فرد بعضهم فقد قام هذا البعض بما يسقط الفرض عن الباقين. نعم.
The Sheikh, Allah, he mentions this next narration has come on the authority of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, when the people are passing by, it is enough if one of them offers the greeting of peace on their behalf, and it is enough for those who are sitting if one of them replies. This hadith is reported by Ahmad and Al-Bayhaqi. As it relates to this narration, then there is some speech that can be stated regarding its chain of narration, the chain itself. As for the indication that is given to us by way of the text of the hadith itself, then what is understood from it is that it shows that if there are a group of people, and someone were to within that group give the salams on behalf of that group, then the responsibility is removed from the rest of those who are in that group. Similarly, if someone gives salams to a group of people and some of them within that group are to respond to that salam, then it will remove the responsibility from the rest of those who are within that gathering. And similar has been stated by Ibn Qayyim, wherein he said, alayhi rahmatullah, that by way of this lends support to the viewpoint of those who say that responding to the salam when it is given is fardun kifaya. It is a communal obligation, such that if some of the people fulfill it, then the responsibility has been removed from the rest of those in that particular locale or that gathering, what have you. He says how excellent this would be, meaning Ibn Qayyim continues to say how excellent this would be if this narration were affirmed, meaning that Ibn Qayyim, he is aware and he is from the generality of those scholars who deem the narration to be weak. So he's saying this would be an excellent viewpoint if this narration were an authentic narration. He says, and so we mentioned previously that as it relates to the stronger viewpoint concerning initiating the salams, then to initiate the salams is a sunnah mu'akkida. It's an emphasized or stressed sunnah, if you will. He says, from the scholars there are those who say that it is wajib. Amongst them there are those who say that it is mustahab. But the stronger viewpoint is that it is sunnah mu'akkida. As it relates to responding to the salams that have been given to you, then it is wajib. It is wajib. There being no difference of opinion regarding this issue. He says, so if the salam is initiated, then one must give the salams. If it is a group type of situation, as we mentioned, that and then one person within that group responds to the salams, that removes the responsibility from everyone else that are within that group. Here we mention a mas'ala, and the issue is that if someone comes to a gathering and he wants to give salam to those who are in that gathering, but he believes the preponderant thought with him is that the people in that gathering are not going to respond back to him. They're not going to respond back to him. Then what should he do? Should he go ahead and initiate the greetings anyway, when he may be in fear that some of his brothers, they may fall into the sin by not returning the salams back to him? Or should he just leave it off? The Sheikh says, well, we have to look at why he believes that the people are not going to respond back to his greeting. Is it because of some mukhalafah that he has with himself? Yeah, and he's upon some type of deviation or what have you. In that case, he needs to rectify himself. He needs to get himself together and rectify his own affair, and then thereafter, he comes back and he greets his brothers. As for if he looks at the group and he sees that the group they are distracted, they are unmindful of his presence and is entering into the gathering or what have you, then in this case the Sheikh said that this is not an excuse. Rather, he should still give the salams to those who are in that gathering, and if they don't respond back, then he draws their attention, he gets their attention, and he lets them know that he gave salams to them. And if it's only one brother, then in that case there's an obligation upon that one brother to respond to the salams. If there's a group of people, then if some of the people in that group respond to his salams, this removes the responsibility from everyone else.
الحديث التاسع حديث أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه قال: لا تبدأوا اليهود ولا النصارى بالسلام، وإذا لقيتموهم في طريق فاضطروهم إلى أضيقه. هذا الحديث أيضا فيه أدب من آداب السلام. تكلمنا في حديث سابق عن فضل السلام، ثم في حديث بعد ذلك عن من يبدأ بالسلام فيما يتعلق بين أهل الإسلام. وهذا الحديث يدل على عدم بدء غير المسلم بالسلام، لكن متى بدأوا هم يجابون، متى بدأوا هم يجابون، لقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم: إذا سلم عليكم أهل الكتاب فقولوا وعليكم، فقولوا وعليكم. وهذا البدء كما سبق معنا يا إخوة، لأن السلام هو دعاء وإكرام، هو دعاء وإكرام. ومعنى هذا أن لفظ السلام بخصوصيته لا يبدأ به، لكن لو بدأته بقولك مرحبا أهلا أو نحو ذلك فإن هذا لا يوجد ما يدل على المنع منه، لكن الحديث وارد بلفظ السلام. هذا فيما يتعلق بغير المسلم. أما ما يتعلق بالمسلم العاصي أو من كان من أهل الضلال والمحدثات والبدع، فإن أهل العلم في ذلك على أقوال، منهم من رأى الهجر، ومنهم من قال بأن الهجر سنة حتى يردع، يعني عن ضلاله أو عن معصيته. وليس هذا لكل واقع في معصية ولا لكل واقع في بدعة. من نصح في كبيرة من الكبائر ولم يستجب، ثم بعد ذلك رأى الناصح له أن في هجره سواء هجرا كليا أو جزئيا ما فيه مصلحة له، فلا حرج في الامتناع سواء من مجالسته أو حتى من السلام عليه، أو حتى من السلام عليه. هذا في أمر الكبائر والمعاصي، وهو إظهار الفسق. والدليل على ذلك ما جاء في حديث عبد الله بن المغفل حينما رأى ابن عمه وهو يأخذ الحجر ويرمي به، فقال: إنها لا تقتل عدوا أو لا تقتل صيدا ولا تنكأ عدوا، ولكن تفقأ عينا أو تجرح سنا أو تكسر سنا. فلما رآه يكرر ذلك قال: والله لا كلمتك أبدا، لأنه خالف هدي النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وقد نصح. إذن الهجر هو الأصل في التعامل مع صاحب المعصية أم النصح والترفق به؟ الأصل النصح والترفق به. وكذلك في أمر أهل البدع، أجمع العلماء فيما ذكره الصابوني والبغوي وغيرهم من أهل العلم على هجران أهل البدع ومفارقة مجالسهم ونحو ذلك مما ذكره أهل العلم. وهذا إذا كان صاحب البدعة مكابرا معرضا. أما إذا كان جاهلا ربما لا يعرف أن ما هو فيه هو من أمر البدع، فإنه ينصح. وهنا لا بد أن نعلم أن الهجر على قسمين كما حرر ذلك شيخ الإسلام رحمه الله: هجر تأديب وهجر وقاية. فهجر التأديب النظر فيه إلى المهجور، وهجر الوقاية النظر فيه إلى الهاجر. هجر التأديب أي أنت تهجر فلان حينما بلغه أمر العلم والسنة فأعرض عنها، فربما ينزجر بهجرك له، وهذا ينظر فيه أيضا لمصلحته. وهجر الوقاية ليس بالضروري أن ينظر فيه إلى مصلحة المهجور، بل النظر فيه إلى مصلحة الهاجر نفسه. وذلك أنك ربما لو خالطت بعض أهل البدع لأصابتك العدوى من بدعهم، فلذلك تبتعد عنهم وقاية لنفسك وحفاظا على أفكارك وحفاظا على معتقدك. وهذا الأمر يا إخوة ليس أمرا منفلتا يتصرف به المسلم متى شاء وبما شاء، فليس هذا من الآداب الشرعية، بل ينبغي أن يكون ذلك منضبطا بضوابط الشرع، وفيه مراعاة للمصالح والمفاسد ودفع أعلى المفسدتين بارتكاب أخفهما ضررا، إلى غير ذلك من المصالح الشرعية والقواعد المرعية التي جاءت بها الشريعة. نعم.
The next narration, it comes on the authority of Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu, wherein he mentioned that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, do not initiate the greeting to the Jews and the Christians before they greet you. And when you meet one of them on the road, force him to go to its narrowest side. So this hadith also is a hadith that speaks about some of the etiquettes of the salams. So the first hadith that we mentioned in this regard, it dealt with the adab of the salam, generally speaking. And then the next hadith that we discussed, connected to this very same issue, dealt with initiation of the salam and who should give it first. This hadith, it deals with that we are not to initiate the salam to the non-Muslim. But if they give you the salam, then you can respond back to their salam. For the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that if the people of the book greet you, then you say to them, wa alaykum, and may the same be upon you. This is because, as we mentioned previously, that the salam is a dua for salam, or you're making dua for the salam, and this is something that is specific to the Muslims. And so, as for if a non-Muslim were to come to you, for example, and you say to him, marhaban, welcome, ahlan, statements like this does not enter into this narration. There's no harm in that person saying something like this to a non-Muslim, even if you say it first before they say anything to you. As for the salam specifically, then this is something which should not be initiated to them. He says that, and this is as it relates to the non-Muslim now, but as it relates to the Muslim who is a sinner, or a person of misguidance, or a person of bid'ah, then the scholars, they have various statements as it relates to this issue. He says, from them there are those who see that we are to make outright hajar of them, outright abandonment and boycotting of them. Some of them say that one is to make hajar of them if one believes that, or until that making hajar of them is a sunnah, until the person leaves off their bid'ah or leaves off their disobedience or their sin. He says that, and we must know that all of these people, they are not of the same level. He says some of them, they may be able to be advised. And so if you advise a person and he does not respond to the advice, then at that point, you look into whether or not the hajj is going to be beneficial to that person. And so if the hajj is going to be beneficial to that person, then one can make hajj of them either partially or in totality. He says, and from what enters into that is leaving off this person, leaving off sitting with them, and even leaving off the salam. He says, and so, as it relates to boycotting the likes of these people, the people of sin, disobedience, innovation, and the likes of this, he said that we have an also in this regard, and it is the hadith of Abdullah ibn Wafal who had mentioned, that he said to, or that he had mentioned, or it was mentioned to him, and he did not throw pebbles, don't throw these small pebbles, because they don't harm the enemy and they don't kill game animal. Only thing they do is perhaps puncture the eye or injure one's tooth. And so, and he continued to do so. He continued to throw rocks. And so what said to him thereafter, I'm not going to speak to you again. I'm not going to speak to you again. Why? Because he was advised first. He was advised first, but he did not adhere to the advice. So therefore he was boycotted thereafter. The Sheikh, he said that, and so when one makes this hajj, it's out of nusr, it's out of sincerity and wanting good for the person that is being abandoned and boycotted. With regards to the abandonment and boycotting of the people of bid'ah and the people of misguidance, then a number of the scholars have spoken about this affair. From them, As-Sabuni, likewise Al-Baghawi, they have all stated that abandonment and boycotting of the people of bid'ah and deviation is something which it is permissible within the religion. And so if a person is given advice and he opposes that advice, in his case, then the hajj can be implemented. As for if the person is jahil, and this is the case rather if the person he's knowingly opposes right guidance, he knowingly opposes the advice. As for the person who's ignorant, he doesn't know any better, then you advise this person and you are going to treat this person differently than you would treat someone who opposes what is correct knowingly. He says, and hajar, it is of two types. Abandonment and boycotting of someone is of two types. There's the hajar that is done as a ta'deeb, as a means of discipline and correction and rectification. And then there's the hajar that is done as a waqaya, as a means of protection. He says, as for the one that is done, from the perspective and standpoint of rectification and discipline, then one has to look at the person, and if one deems that it's going to be beneficial, then you do it. As for the one that is done for protective reasons, then one has to look at the need that lies for that. He says, and so if a person, they oppose what is correct based upon knowledge, and they turn away from the sunnah, and they turn away from right guidance, then in this case, one looks into the harms and benefits or what have you, and then they boycott or abandon that person, and it is for the benefit of the one that is being abandoned. It is for out of discipline and correction for the one that is being abandoned in this case. But in regards to the protective type of hajar, one does so as a means of protection for their own selves, then this is out of what's to the better benefit of the hajar himself, of the boycotter himself. He is trying to protect himself from the harm and innovation and deviation of this person, and so that he does not fall into the disease of this person's bid'ah and his deviation. And this abandonment of the people is not something which is done arbitrarily, any kind of way that a person wants to do it. Rather, it's something that is governed by way of legislative guidelines. One has to look at the benefits and the harms. He has to weigh sometimes two evils and take the lesser of these two evils and the likes of that. This is something which is governed by way of dawabit, by way of legislative guidelines and what the Sharia has set in place.
سنقتصر على هذا إن شاء الله. نأخذ بعض الأسئلة، يكفي 3 إن شاء الله نكمل فيه. الأول يسأل، يقول: من كان جالسا ثم ذهب إلى حاجة ورجع فجلس آخر مكانه، فهل له حق أن يقيمه من مجلسه؟ نعم، له حق، لأن من كان له مجلس فهو أحق به. لكن إذا كان هذا الآخر لا يدري، ربما طلب منه أن يوسع له في مجلسه، أو قال له لا تقم ولكن وسع لي في المجلس، فهذا لا حرج فيه. لكن هنا مسألة، وهو أنه إذا دخل داخل فقمت أنت من مجلسك إكراما له، هل يجوز هذا؟ الصواب في ذلك يجوز، لكن كان ابن عمر يكره ذلك. كان ابن عمر يرى أن صاحب المجلس هو أحق بمجلسه، لكن إذا كان ذلك عن طيب نفس فلا حرج فيه، مثل أن تقوم لكبير سن وتنتقل أنت إلى مكان آخر، فهذا لا حرج فيه إن شاء الله.
So the questioner asks, if someone is in a gathering, they leave that gathering for the sake of some need that he has, and he returns back to the gathering and finds someone else sitting in his place, can he make that person get up so that he can resume his place? The Sheikh says yes, he can make the person get up so that he can assume his place in that gathering. He says that, he says, however, a person can look at the situation. If you realize that the person doesn't know, the person may not know that it was your place, so he may not know the ruling. In this case, and he looks at it, and then he can let the person stay there if he likes. There's no harm in that, and he can go and find another space within the gathering and sit there. The Sheikh says, however, here we can draw attention to an issue, and the issue is that if someone comes into a gathering and you get up from your place to offer your place to that person who came into the gathering as a means of honoring of that person, is this something permissible? The Shaykh says, yes, there's no harm in this, even though Ibn Mas'ud used to hate that. Ibn Mas'ud, he used to hate that because the one who preceded the people to that particular place has the most right to that place. But if, for example, you're in a gathering and an elder walks into the gathering, for example, and you get up from your place to let that elder sit in your place and you go sit somewhere else, the Shaykh says there's no harm in anyone doing it.
نعم. يقول هذا السائل، يقول: هل يدخل في حديث لا تبدأ اليهود والنصارى بالسلام المجوس مثلا؟ نقول من باب أولى يدخل المجوس، لأن يجوز لأهل الكتاب ما لا يجوز لغيرهم، فإذا كان لا يجوز البدء لهم بالسلام فمن باب أولى أنه لا يجوز لغيرهم. نعم.
So the questioner says that in relation to the narration that speaks about not initiating the greeting to the Jews and the Christians, do the Majus or the Magians likewise enter into that? The Sheikh says, yes, even more so they enter into it. He said, because what is permissible in relation to the dealings with the Jews and the Christians is permissible in relation to the dealings with other than them from the non-Muslims.
نعم. السؤال الأخير يقول بالنسبة إذا كان الشخص في سيارة وقام بعمل إنذار السيارة، الصوت الهرن يعني هذا ما يسمى بالعامية، دون أن يسلم، فهل يرد عليه؟ ترد عليه بالهرن أيضا؟ لا يرد عليه لا بالهرن ولا بغيره، وليس هذا بسلام، هذا ليس بسلام إلا في حالة أنك رأيته يحرك شفتيه بالسلام، فلا حرج أيضا أنك ترفع يديك وتشير إليه وترد عليه بالسلام. بارك الله في الجميع.
So the Sheikh, he mentions that if someone is in a vehicle, in a car, and he's passing by someone else, and he looks out through the window of the car and he waves at someone, should someone wave back to him? Should he, does this enter into the same ruling of returning the salam? The Sheikh, he says no. He says you don't do it with that or anything else. He says unless it be the case that the person he indicates with his lips, and from what's apparent you can read his lips and say that he's giving you the salams with the wave. In this case, you can return the salams back to him along with the wave.
بارك الله فيكم. نقف على هذا، وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا، والحمد لله رب العالمين. وتفضلوا إلى ضيافتكم. بارك الله فيكم، حياكم الله.